Hello and welcome to my top 10 most surprising teams. Now, this does not mean they had to be good. They could be bad. It just could be like anything, just something that would surprise anyone. That's all there needs to be said. You should like and subscribe. That's cool. First up, we got Notre Dame. Notre Dame, they started off the season at number 8? They started off at number 5 and took a close 11-point loss at Ohio State before then going on to lose to Marshall. And then just continuing to have one of the worst seasons we've ever seen, losing to teams like Stanford, losing to they got their butts kicked by USC pretty much. They also surprised us by beating the shit out of I think at the time one-loss Syracuse, and then kicking Clemson's ass, taking a close win against Navy, killing Boston College, and now they currently are getting ready to play South Carolina. After week 1, I was like, all right, Notre Dame is one of our good teams this year. And then when I saw them lose to Marshall, I was like, wow. Like, this was a very surprising moment. Not only for me, but for like everybody who cares somewhat about college football. No one, like Notre Dame losing at home to Marshall was just crazy. And that's all there has to be said about Notre Dame. That was just really what surprised. Also, the Stanford loss, that was a terrible loss. I think Stanford's 3-9 right now currently. That was another terrible loss. So Notre Dame definitely had us surprised. Number 9 is Washington. Washington was 4-8 last season. And they were not good last season at all. To turn around and go 10-2, that was quite a change. Kind of ridiculous. And I don't really know if there was a whole lot to be said in the transfer portal and whatnot, but Washington definitely blew some minds. The only during the beginning of the season, I thought Washington was overrated as shit. With a win over a terrible Michigan State team, a win over Washington, and then a 8-point loss to UCLA, but they put on a pathetic 8-point touchdown at the end. And then they lost to ASU. That was when I was like, okay, this Washington team is overrated as fuck. And then they continued to win out their schedule, beating Oregon State, beating Oregon, obviously killing Colorado, and then beating Washington State on the road, and now they are going to play Texas in a fine bowl game, and they finish off their regular season, 10-2. I could not have said that Washington would be finishing in the top 3, or actually in second place in the Pac-12. I would not have said that. I would have definitely said Utah or USC. Definitely. Number 8, Georgia. Now, this one might not be so surprising for everyone, but it was very surprising for me, especially the fact that they went undefeated in number 1 and they've been so just dominant. I thought Georgia was honestly going to be a 2-loss team this year. They were still going to be good, but not as good because they lost a lot of people to the draft. A bunch of people dipped, but Georgia they just bounced back and continued to dominate. Yes, they still have Stetson Bennett going hamburger at Georgia, but I was like, dude, I thought Georgia was not going to be this good, and they were slaughtering everyone. There was a couple close games that they had this year, but when they kind of kicked Tennessee's ass, who's currently ranked number 1 at the time, I feel like Georgia got disrespected a lot this season and has been very surprising. I don't even know what number. South Carolina. I would not have said they would be finishing off in the top 25. I would say they would have finished off this season with probably like 6-6. Their second game at Arkansas, they lost 44-30. And then in week 3 at South Carolina, they got slaughtered by Georgia 48-7. It's not even like they put up points. They put up 7 points, and this is an offensive team from what we now know. I was like, this South Carolina team's overrated as fuck. They beat a Charlotte team. They beat a South Carolina State team. But then they go on the road to hand Kentucky, their second loss of the season at Kentucky. That was a little impressive, but not enough to get them ranked. South Carolina then has a very close game against Texas A&M in which they win by 6 points at South Carolina. It's like, okay, that's Texas A&M. And then they get placed in top 25, and Missouri beats South Carolina at South Carolina. And that was when I was like, the South Carolina team's kind of ass. South Carolina beats Vanderbilt on the road, 38-27, a little sketchy. And then they get shut out by Florida, 6-38 at Florida. And this was when I was like, dude, this South Carolina team, I mean, I didn't even like pay attention to it anymore. Like, I just saw the score and I was like, all right, South Carolina's done. And then they go on to upset the shit out of Tennessee, 38-63. They beat the shit out of Tennessee. They killed them. And Tennessee was ranked number 5 at the time, trying to secure a playoff spot. And South Carolina is just like, fuck yeah, dude, I'm going to absolutely crush your hopes and dreams. And as if the fucking Florida game even mattered. This was so impressive. As if it doesn't stop there, South Carolina goes on the road against Clemson and upsets Clemson. Now, Clemson, very overrated team this year, very bad and very overrated. The ACC is the most overrated conference this year. Said it all year. And South Carolina pulled off an upset in which they were pretty much down like the whole game. They were down 14-0. Then they were down 16-7, 23-14, 30-21. South Carolina managed to pull the comeback off and win it. And now they're ranked number 19 and being praised. South Carolina has had a crazy season. You know, getting slaughtered by bad teams, getting upset by bad teams, and then just slaughtering and upsetting some of the top tier teams. Just a ridiculous season South Carolina had, and very surprising. Number whatever, Kansas State. Now, if you walked up to me and said, I predict for the 2021 or 2022-2023 season, Kansas State will win the Big 12 championship, I would have said, you are fucking crazy. I would have said Oklahoma State, Baylor, Oklahoma, maybe even Texas. I would not have said Kansas State would win the Big 12 championship. It wouldn't have even popped up in my mind. The maximum I could have said Kansas State's record would be 8-5 with the win in their bowl game, whatever. I would not have said they would be finishing off number 9, playing against Alabama in the Cotton Bowl? The Sugar Bowl. I mean, it's just ridiculous how Kansas State has kind of just popped up and won the Big 12. Like, ridiculous. I mean, I don't really think anybody saw Kansas State being this high tier of a team this year. And that's what is just so surprising about them is and they've been very, very good. One of their only losses is to, I'm pretty sure all 3 of their losses are to top 25 teams right now. Tulane, Texas, and TCU. All top 25 teams, all playing in fine bowl games. And those are their 3 losses. The Tulane game and the Texas game were very close games. The TCU game was a 10-point game in which Kansas State owned and they sold. Kansas State could have been in the playoff talk. They could have gone undefeated if it weren't for themselves beating themselves up. But Kansas State, man, what a surprising team this year. Tennessee, man, what a season they have had. If Again, if you said Tennessee would be ranked number 1 at a certain time in the season, I would call you crazy. I would love to see it happen, but I would call you crazy. Tennessee started off this season unranked. They slaughtered Ball State at Tennessee. Okay. They get placed at number 24, and they play at number 17 Pitt, and they barely win in overtime by a touchdown. Tennessee moves up to number 15, slaughters a small school, moves up to number 11, and then they barely walk away with a win over ranked Florida. They go up to number 8, and then they slaughter LSU at LSU. That at the time didn't look like such a big win because LSU was only ranked number 25 at the time. But it did later on in the season. And then Alabama versus Tennessee happened. And Tennessee pulled off the upset win. Even though it was at Tennessee, they managed to pull off the upset win against Alabama with a last-second field goal. Then they move up to number 3, slaughter a bad school, slaughter Kentucky. And then they move up to number 1, where they go at Georgia, and this is where they are handed their first loss. We really see Tennessee's true colors. They slaughter a bad Missouri team, and then they got their ass kicked by South Carolina. Slaughter Vanderbilt, and now they are ranked at number 6 going to the Orange Bowl. Tennessee has had a very surprising season. Now, in 2 ways. One, they started off unranked and managed to get placed at number 1 for a portion of time. 2, because people said that they were the number 1 playoff contender, like they would be in. Then they lose to Georgia, and it's like, okay, maybe they'll get in. And then now all of a sudden their playoff hopes are gone. They went from the unranked to number 1. Then everybody's like, Tennessee's the best team in the country. And they take a terrible loss to South Carolina and an embarrassing loss to Georgia. They got their ass kicked. Even though it was a low-scoring game, Georgia kind of owned it. And Tennessee, they've just had a crazy season, a very surprising season. Oregon State, again, another Pac-12 team that I would not have said. I mean, Oregon State's been so bad for so long. Like, I think last season they finished off like 7-6 or 6-7, something like that. I would not have said Oregon State would be finishing off 9-3. And there was even, like, if you even look at Oregon State's schedule and what they did, they could have been a playoff contender. They lost 2 games by 3 points. They lost to USC by 3, and they lost to Washington by 3. They got their ass kicked by Utah, but Oregon State had 4 turnovers, and every single turnover set Utah up for touchdown potential, and Utah capitalized, scoring a total of 28 points off of all 4 turnovers. So if you subtract 28 by 42 to give us what our like real score would be, Oregon State's leading 16-14. Oregon State doesn't make all those terrible mistakes. Utah is just right there. They're trailing. Like, the reason Utah dominated so much was because of Oregon State's turnovers. I think Oregon State was even leading 16 to no, they weren't. They were down 16-21. Utah got a pick 6 to end the first quarter. I mean, Oregon State, they could have been a playoff fighting contender. They could have been undefeated if they just put themselves together, but they didn't. They'll get a pretty crappy bowl game for what they've been this season against Florida. But, again, the committee might know what they're doing. I say this team, this definitely surprised me, that Oregon State. I thought they were overrated as shit, and then all of a sudden I was like, dude, this Oregon State team is for real, with a major upset over their rival for like the first time in how many years. Oregon State, man, ridiculous season, very surprising. Wow, insanely low quality picture. Alabama was what? Ranked number 1 for like the start of the season. No, I think they were they were number 1. They started off the season at number 1, barely winning against Texas, dropped down to number 2. Then they moved back up to number 1. Then they dropped down to number 3 going into the Tennessee game. Then they dropped down to number 6 after losing. Then they lose to LSU, dropped down to number 9, and they're currently ranked at number 5 with 2 losses. I mean, Alabama, Bryce Young starting off the season at number 1, like it was almost certain Alabama was going to be our SEC playoff contender this year. False, wrong. 2-loss Alabama. Can't get in, 2 losses. Taking 2 very surprising losses. Like, if anything, I would say Alabama would take their second loss in the SEC championship. No, they lost to LSU, and they lost to Tennessee. Just, honestly, nothing much to be said other than, like, you'd expect Alabama to be the playoff contender starting off the season ranked at number 1 and pretty much just flip-flopping with Georgia all season. And all of a sudden, they're not even in it. They're 2 losses. They didn't even go to the SEC championship. Like, that is a little surprising. That is like, wow, what happened there? Texas A&M. Now, this is our first, like, bad surprising. If we go ahead, if we go ahead and remember, to use our little thinking tanks, Texas A&M started off at number 6. They started off the season at number 6 with like one of the best transfer portal classes. And then in the second week of football, Texas A&M loses to Appalachian State. Texas A&M starts climbing back. They knock off Miami, and then they knock off Arkansas, 2 teams that'll finish off, pretty sure not even getting bowl games. I think Arkansas got a bowl game, but Miami didn't. And these teams were ranked in the top 15. So Texas A&M goes up to number 17, slaughtered by Mississippi State. Texas A&M plays Alabama very close at Alabama. Then they lose to South Carolina, lose by 3 points to Ole Miss, get their ass kicked by Florida, lose to Auburn, beat UMass, and then they beat LSU. So like Texas A&M starts off at number 6, and we're like, and then they just take some terrible losses. They get knocked off. They don't even make it to a bowl game, and we're like, wow, that is just so crazy. Number 6 in the country, literally flopped so hard. But then they end it on a banger. If Texas A&M could have beaten Auburn, which they definitely could have and should have, if they would have done that, they would have had a bowl game. And I mean, the season wouldn't have been all that bad, but they lost that game, which was just a shitty, terrible loss. And then they beat UMass, and then they beat LSU. LSU ranked at number 5 at the time, knocks them off. Still in the SEC championship, but bonks them down with the loss. I expected this loss, and Texas A&M, their season looked terrible. They were 3-7. They looked to be just done. They looked to just be done. And then they finish it off with a banger with a win over LSU. Now, I don't know about that. I don't know about the fans. Maybe they're like, hope is there. Maybe we have a good team somewhat. Maybe they just need more improvement. Maybe there's some coaching issues they need to figure out. But I do think quite a few Texas A&M players entered the transfer portal. I'm not too sure, though. So this team definitely surprised the country. Whether they started off at number 6 and didn't even get a bowl game, or whether they were 3-7 or 4-7, knocked off LSU at Texas A&M, who they knocked off currently number 5, or they were currently number 5, LSU, and kind of a beatdown too, beatdown fashion. So I don't know what was more surprising, but this team definitely surprised us. Honorable mentions. First, we have Miami, of course. Same kind of deal with Texas A&M there. Miami, they started off at like number 13, not even ranked, not even getting a bowl game. They were so bad. They were just terrible, so bad. They had a nice transfer portal year, it looked like, and then they just flopped, went absolutely south. The Hurricane was not, in fact, back. USC, again, kind of the situation with Washington, except this one was a little bit like we kind of knew, yes. So they were 4-8 last season, had one of the worst USC seasons in a very long time. And then they had a fantastic transfer portal year. So they get placed at number 14. And they proved us, I mean, they lived up pretty much. Started off at number 14, finished off at number 10 with 2 losses. And they have the Heisman winner. So, I mean, this was kind of arguable, but yeah. And then Texas. This one was kind of more surprising for me considering how bad Texas did last year. And then they barely lose to Alabama. They barely took any losses this year, and I was very surprised as to how good Texas was and what their record is and how good they could have been, like what they could have been and they just weren't it. So their 4 losses getting a fantastic bowl game, but they could literally be number 1 in the country, undefeated. Like there was games, they lost by 7 points to TCU. They beat Kansas State, so that's not even there. They lost in overtime at Texas Tech. They lost by 1 point to a last-second field goal to Alabama. And then what was their other loss? Their other loss. Let's see. I'm on the ESPN app here. And then they lost. Oh, they lost to Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State in a massive comeback fashion by, well, not really massive, but Texas was up 31-17. Basically, Texas sold, gave it to Oklahoma State. That was when Oklahoma State was actually doing good. They weren't getting ripped to shreds by injuries. So, yeah. And, yeah, all right, number 1, TCU. Sorry, I was checking a message on my phone. TCU. Again, kind of what I said earlier with Kansas State, except if you would have told me TCU would be playing in the Big 12 championship at all, and they would be in the college football playoff, could have gone undefeated but lost in the Big 12 championship, that was like your prediction, I would have said you are actually mentally insane. You are not safe to be around other human beings. You need to be put in containment away from the rest of humanity. And then you would have been right, and then I would have gone insane and been put in containment away from the rest of humanity. TCU, Max Duggan, I mean, they had a Heisman candidate. Like, TCU was just ridiculous this year. I mean, they just showed up. They were like 5-7 last year. I don't even think they got a bowl game. Upset over Baylor, but they didn't even get like a bowl game or anything. Just to absolutely bounce back the next season. I don't think there was any talk at all about TCU, any talk at all. There was no talk. They didn't get ranked until they beat Oklahoma. They didn't get ranked until they absolutely slaughtered Oklahoma. And then they just won out in Big 12 championship. Honestly, it came down to a bad play call by the head coach. They should have kicked the field goal because they have a defense. They could have shut him down. And they decided to go for it. And then not even QB sneak it for like half a yard. They ran it to their running back. And of course, you're going to give them too much time. They lost. But TCU's number 3, and they're playing Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl. TCU's in the college football playoff. Like, that is just so surprising. Of the Big 12, I would definitely not have said TCU would be coming out. I would definitely say either Oklahoma State or Baylor. Oh, that was also an honorable mention, was Baylor. Baylor kind of shocked the world. Maybe even Oklahoma State too, but not really. Baylor was like number 9 to start the season, and they finished off 6-6. So yeah, that's definitely an honorable mention. That should be there too. Oklahoma State also, they were like, I think 7-1 at a time, like number 11, and then they went to like 7-5. So yeah, but TCU definitely surprised me the most this season. Definitely a very crazy season for them, in fact. And that is my top 10 most surprising teams this year. I mean, if you enjoyed, tell me your top 10 most surprising teams. You know, just tell me in the comments, dude. I'll friggin' read it. Like and subscribe, like I said at the beginning, because that's so awesome and cool, and it helps a lot. If you made it this far, I love you. And that's all for me. Adios.